So welcome back to our series on transcending common spiritual obstacles. We've identified 12 of these obstacles. And today we are going to talk about what it means to heal from a spiritual abuse. First of all, identifying what are some things that would be considered spiritual abuse, and then what are the steps that we can take to release ourselves from that and to begin that healing process within. And, I wanted to mention in full disclosure that I am not a licensed therapist. So some of the topics that I bring up could bring up strong feelings, fear or anger, resentment, or even memories, right? For you or for people that you serve. And if anything that emerges from this session creates anxiety, despair, depression, or makes it hard for you to function in daily life, I highly and strongly urge you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional for support. It's just so important that we get that support that we need. And some of these topics are not easy. Some of them go back to childhood. And, we're going to touch upon some difficult things. However, I do identify as an emotional healer, right? So both when I'm facilitating my own healing and when I'm holding a sacred container for others. So these emotions can be observed and expressed and released. And I think this is a really important topic to do. It's really important for us to be aware as spiritual leaders, because in taking on that role, we have a huge responsibility. Not only is it a huge privilege to step into that role and to guide other people, not only guide them in the physical plane, but guide them towards a deeper level of consciousness. We also have a huge responsibility to be self-reflective of our own behavior, to be aware of the things that are happening in our field and how they may impact people's perceptions of spirituality. They may even drive people away from that because they've seen these examples. So first I wanted to step into, what is spirituality, and just really kind of defining that, although it can be lots of things for different people. So spirituality, as I discovered some different definitions online, is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or the soul, as opposed to just the material or physical things. And this is the one I love the most, a process of reformation of the personality ego. So I know in my own experience, I have gone through many, many reiterations of my personality ego. Some of those, I was very unconscious about how I was showing up, how I was communicating, what the actions were that I was taking. And then over time, we begin to reflect, we begin to become more conscious of self. We begin to understand what parts of ourselves are coming from more that ego-based, physical reality-based, even the personality, if you believe that we are a soul in a human vessel, that we came here and we have a personality, it's almost like wearing a costume in a way. I have the Bevin costume, and each of you have your own costume. And part of that is understanding, how do we perform? How do we act? How do our actions impact others? How do our actions impact the world? And this is the process of the spiritual journey, right? And I think that most, if not all, human beings will at some time in their life seek out a connection with something that's greater than themselves. And this usually leads us into groups or communities with people who are interested in similar kinds of explorations. And it will likely lead us also to connect with spiritual leaders and mentors through that process, right? And if you are a soul that's inhabiting a human vessel, it's likely at some point in your life, you will intersect with some type of abuse, whether that's mental, emotional, sexual, financial, physical, or spiritual. And as much as I would like it not to be that way, it is a part of this physical reality. That doesn't mean I'm excusing it, and I will never excuse abuse in any form. As a matter of fact, I feel very strongly about speaking up about it. And we'll talk about this in just a little bit, where we talk about things like, oh, life is an illusion. Well, when these things happen to people, it doesn't feel like an illusion. It's very real. And it's very hurtful when these things happen. And the root causes are really complex. However, I believe that most of it boils down to how human beings choose to use their power. You know, are we dominating others? Are we trying to extract something from others? Or are we using our power consciously and mindfully? And it takes a very self-reflective human being to break these patterns of outward abuse and also our own self-abuse, you know, where we kind of beat ourselves up within. So spiritual abuse is the use of faith, beliefs, or practices to coerce, control, or damage someone for the purpose beyond the victim's well-being, right? Beyond the victim's well-being. And I'm going to take a moment here just to share my screen because I want to share this handout with you and making sure that we can all see it. Okay, so you can just kind of give me a thumbs up if you can see that, okay? All right, great. So let's talk about different aspects of spiritual abuse. And, you know, I don't know that I necessarily ranked these, but I wanted to bring an awareness of probably the most blatant ones first, and then we can talk about more subtleties as time goes on. But one of the ones that I think is probably the most egregious, and we've seen examples of this, is when a spiritual leader asks their followers to take their own life or to take the life of others in the name of faith, right? This is probably one of the most serious instances of spiritual abuse. And we have, you know, examples of this. And with each of these, I'm going to kind of give some brief examples so that you can kind of tune into what this might be. But a lot of people are familiar with Jim Jones and Jamestown. This was a situation where a particular cult leader encouraged all of his followers to drink a liquid which was poisoned and to kill themselves in the promise that they would go to heaven. You know, there was another one, the Heaven's Gate cult, which believed that the end of the world was coming and they needed to kill themselves and others in order to ride on a UFO, I believe, to the Heaven's Gate. So there's a lot of examples where faith, while it's wonderful and it's amazing and spirituality can be very uplifting, can also take people to this really dark place, right? Throughout the world and throughout human history, we've had a myriad of things called holy wars, right? Different religions, different faiths, different countries enacting war upon each other, taking over territory, doing things, even stealing, you know, spiritual artifacts, those kinds of things in the name of their own religion, and even spiritual martyrdom, you know, where you're promised riches and happiness if you sacrifice yourself in the name of God. And I'm not trying to pick, I will use different faiths and different examples in this. I'm not trying to pick on any one faith or say, let's, you know, this is better or worse or anything like that. But there are definitely examples in just about every faith of times when the doctrine has been twisted in order to get people to do things which were really unconscionable, you know. The next one would be physical or sexual abuse that's justified by spiritual doctrine or is covered up by spiritual leaders. And we've seen many cases of this recently where this has been uncovered, where victims have been coming forward and at many times to their own risk and many times to not being believed. And it came out that, you know, churches or parishes were actually transferring someone that they knew was enacting these kinds of abuses on their followers. They just transferred them to another space, you know, to quote unquote start over. And, you know, these are things that have had huge impacts on the people who were impacted by the victims who were impacted by this. And so this is a place, again, where spiritual leadership can really go into a very dark place. And even this thought of spare the rod and spoil the child, you know, in some spiritual traditions, it was said, well, you need to be harsh to your children, you need to be harsh to your wife or whatever it is, because, you know, God is a punishing God, and we need to be, you know, in alignment with what, you know, the faith is teaching. And this, again, it just has, you know, lifelong impacts on the people who are victimized by it. And then there's financial abuse. right? That's justified in the name of supporting the cause. Now, this doesn't mean that I think that anyone giving to a spiritual cause is a bad thing. You know, if you give freely and that's what you want to do, and you feel that the leader and the organization is in integrity with what they're offering, by all means do that. But when you get into a situation where there's a demand or shaming if followers don't give certain amounts or they don't give everything. I mean, there's even been leaders who have expected people to give up every single one of their worldly possessions in order to join the cause. It starts to become abusive, right? And when you see that there are spiritual leaders living like extravagant lifestyles with mansions and private jets, and then people in their community are suffering, you know, they're hungry, they're homeless, and yet they have these, you know, millions and billions of dollars. It doesn't mean that I don't think that spiritual leaders should be able to be abundant or be supported. I really do feel that. But there is a level of that which can border on the abuse. And then, you know, there's an example, and different people will agree with me or not agree with me. And one thing I'll say is I don't ever expect you to agree with what I say. You know, this is my perspective. I'm teaching this. I'm offering ideas, and you get to decide what is right for you and what's not right for you. I will never try to tell you what to believe. But, you know, there's this tradition of the giving of alms, and it's not just in one religion, it's in multiple religions, where you can actually pay money to get salvation or the clearing of sin or those kinds of things. So it just depends on the motivation behind why people would be giving money and what that expectation is. This one I feel is personally spiritual abuse, and I've experienced it, which is forcing spiritual beliefs on others through violence, suppression, or proselytizing, right? And we've seen this throughout history, where one culture takes over another, or you know, takes over another country, and then they deny the people who live there the right to practice their spiritual beliefs. They expect them to convert to their belief. And this one may be kind of controversial, but I do believe in some cases mission work to go into other countries where people have a different spiritual belief than the group that's going. They see them as godless. They see them as, you know, sinners, and they see them as they need to be converted. Otherwise, you know, they'll never go to heaven. And there's a lot of things there that I think can be really damaging. It depends. It's not necessarily wrong or bad to share what you believe with other people. It's just, are you expecting them to change their beliefs in order to believe what you do? And that's really the fundamental, threshold, if you will, the fundamental threshold between the two things. If you're just sharing because someone was curious and you want to share, that's great. And now, if you are pushing them to do what you want and to believe as you do, that becomes a problem, and it becomes really harmful to other people. And this one, claiming to be God or to speak on behalf of God for the purpose of attracting followers and holding power over them. So, you know, we all probably have studied a little bit about the pharaohs, you know, they were considered, or at least we believe that they were considered, archaeologists and anthropologists believe they were considered sort of a living God, and they erected monuments to themselves, and people, you know, weren't allowed to be in their presence, and all of these kinds of things. And sometimes it's called the Messiah complex, right? Where people have a need to be seen as a savior, to be elevated above others, and people can only access God through them. And I know by talking about this that I'm really getting into what is a very sacred belief system in some religions, that there is a savior and they are elevated above others, and people can only access God through them. And again, this is my personal belief, but there have been, even in modern times, people who have had this Messiah complex and have used it in very destructive ways, like David Koresh, who was part of the Branch Davidian cult. He was the leader of that, and he claimed to be the Messiah returning to earth, and he did a lot of very abusive things. And then, of course, you know, that did not turn out well for the people who had a clash with the United States government over this whole community. And so I see channeling divine wisdom, which a lot of people who are in the spirituality field believe they do, and I believe that I do that as well. And if you're sharing it with the benefit of all, without a power trip, without a need to convert people, without a need to control people, that feels really great for me. You know, it feels really great for me. I write things sometimes and I think, oh, where did that come from? I don't believe that came from necessarily my humanness. But saying, well, I'm God and I have the answer and you need to listen to me is an entirely different situation than just channeling divine wisdom, right? And this one may be controversial as well. Some people believe that they are the chosen ones, right? They believe they're the chosen ones. They believe that there's only so many people who will go to heaven. They believe that there's certain people that God have chosen and other people that haven't been chosen. You know, they might tell people they're entitled to money or power or spiritual enlightenment or going to heaven because of their status, and anyone does not believe what you believe is going to hell. And so I feel personally that this is abusive. I feel personally, and I don't think that many people think this is abusive. I think it's really leading people down a path of separation rather than unity. And in my opinion, spirituality should be pursued for the purpose of continuing to explore our connection to the oneness, not only the oneness of the divine source, God, goddess, whatever you call that, but also with each other, right? So anything that puts this separation between us is bound to hurt people. You know, and actually recently I started telling people, you know, calling people an unbeliever is not really true. And it feels kind of abusive because, you know, there's 4,000 different spiritual beliefs on earth. You know, everybody can't, you know, each one of them can't be chosen. Each one of them can't be the truth. There has to be some kind of thread of truth in all of that. And sometimes I get good reactions from that, bringing that forward, and sometimes I don't. But I think that anything that pulls us into separation is probably not the direction that we want to be going. And we've seen this probably quite a bit, you know, using the interpretation of a spiritual text to justify harmful actions, like changing the wording to benefit the leadership or the in-group, or to, you know, subjugate or oppress the out-group. This happens a lot. I see it a lot online. I see people quoting, you know, different spiritual texts, and some of it feels, again, like that division, you know. And then when you're picking and choosing the parts of a spiritual text to make the point that benefits you, but you're not pulling forward the other parts that don't benefit you. So, you know, my personal viewpoint, and you're welcome to share that or not, is that, you know, when we do channel divine wisdom and we bring it in, it is filtered through our humanness. So when I write something, even if it has a divine source, I am going to filter it through my experience as Bevin Niemann on this earth and everything I've been through, the biases I hold, the vision that I hold, whatever. I'm going to be filtering that. So we cannot help but add a layer of humanness to every spiritual text. So I don't necessarily agree that a spiritual text is perfect as it is. It is exactly as a human being wrote it. And so then there's lots of interpretations, right? We could all take one single word and we could interpret that word in many different ways, depending on what kind of life experiences we had, kind of culture we grew up in, maybe even our gender or many other factors. So to say, you know, that this is how it is, it's really pretty harsh towards many other people who intersect with that. And then this is one, you know, that's been in the news over the past few years, you know, which is isolating people who choose to leave a spiritual community from their family and their friends or their social network. And particularly Scientology has had a lot of this, a lot of these accusations being lodged against them by people who chose to leave that particular religious group. And they claimed that they were using guilt and shame and intimidation to keep them in line or to keep them in the group. And some of them even claimed that the organization was was threatening to destroy their personal or professional reputation by revealing, some of the things they shared in confidence, whether that was in groups or one-to-one counseling with the spiritual leaders, that was held over their head. And, I'm not here to make that judgment. I don't know people's experiences. I certainly didn't read the whole case. I don't know everything that happened. But, when these things come about, it's really important for us to understand that the key thing for me is that every person gets to choose their spirituality, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so, anything that's trying to keep someone in line or keep them integrated in the group, even if they don't want to be there, and then is ostracizing them from their support system, it can't be a good thing. It just can't be a good thing. This is one that I talk about quite a bit, which is spiritual leaders who teach that you can only have a relationship with God, Goddess, Source, Allah through them. Like they are the intermediary, right? And this happens sometimes with gurus, and it happens sometimes with faith healers. Not that I love healers. I think healing is amazing. But when someone says the only way you can heal is through me, or the only way that you can communicate with God is through me, or you have to listen to exactly what I say in order to have this relationship, I believe that we all have a direct connection to all that is and what is greater than ourselves. And so I'm not a fan of gurus. I know that some people are, and that's okay, and everybody's on their own spiritual path. But for me, I feel that this message is abusive. I feel this message is controlling. I feel this message is more about power and ego than it is about helping people gain that spiritual connection. So that's my personal view on it. And then questioning spiritual teachings, beliefs, or a leader is forbidden, right? This is a really destructive power dynamic. Again, the leader is the only authority. You're not allowed to question. Questioning is a weakness. You don't have enough belief. This happens in a lot of different spiritual groups. And I have been a questioner all my life. I grew up as a Christian, and then I was an atheist for a while, and then I had a spiritual reawakening, and now I consider myself a seeker. But back when I went to Sunday school, I was always the person raising their hand. Like, wait a minute, on page 49, it says this, and on page 52, it says that. Okay, which thing is it? Because those contradict each other. That was always me. And I wasn't met with a lot of acceptance about that. A lot of times it was like, well, and they'd give me a pat answer, but it wasn't satisfying. And so, questioning is a healthy thing. And then we have another, we actually have another video and video recording about the act of questioning whether there's a higher power, questioning spiritual beliefs. And I believe that that is actually a strength. If we're not doing that, we're probably not human, right? Because there are so many things that are unknowable about the spiritual path. So, for us to say, well, this is the certainty upon which it is, I think it sets up again that power and control dynamic. And this is one that's also impacted me as well, mandating that people must stay in unhealthy or even abusive relationships because they took a spiritual vow, right? There was a lot of messaging in the church that I went to about this, and it did impact my decision to stay in a relationship which was not good for me for much longer than I probably should have. And it was this idea that wives have to submit to their husbands no matter how they're treated, or living together out of wedlock is a sin, or divorce is a sin. These kinds of things which lock people into unhealthy or abusive relationships. Because of the spirituality, it really doesn't have any place for me. It really doesn't feel like that is a message that is helpful or uplifting. People should never, ever have to stay in something that is abusive to them, ever. They shouldn't have to stay in a job, a relationship, a group, a community, anything that feels abusive. And so this is a big one. And then a spiritual leader who uses others in the group to control or coerce or shame than others, right? And so an example of this recently is there was a man named Keith Raniere, and he was the leader of what they're terming a sex cult. And he recruited this actress, Allison Mack, who appeared on the show Smallville. And I enjoyed that show. I used to watch it. And I was really shocked when this all came out. But she ended up doing horrific things to the other women who followed him in the group. right? And I won't talk about what those things were. You can look it up if you want to. But this man is now serving 120 years in prison, multiple sentences, and then she was, as an accomplice, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I don't know that I feel that that was long enough compared to like what she did. But you know, a spiritual leader should never try to use someone else in their organization to kind of do their dirty work, if you will, or to create a situation where people are pitted against each other. Like, this is just not acceptable for people to do these kinds of things. And, you know, this one is a big deal, right? Shaming or ostracizing people for ways of being that you feel are wrong and justifying that judgment and abuse in the name of faith. You know, and the biggest example of this is conversion therapy for homosexuals, you know, and churches thinking that this was wrong, that it was not, you know, that God was, you know, saying that it was wrong and we need to convert them and there's something massively wrong with you for any reason, that someone would be criticizing your way of being and trying to change you and trying to make you conform to what they want you to be. This is absolutely just abuse, and it doesn't need to be tolerated. Another one is performative spirituality, right? So this is when people act one way inside the spiritual community in front of others while being a totally different person in private, right? Sometimes it's called the Sunday Christian. I'm sure there's other examples of this in other faiths. But performative spirituality could also happen online. You know, people get on, they have a YouTube channel, they look really beautiful and very, you know, in tune, and yet they actually treat the people in their business or whatever like crap, you know, while they're putting on this beautiful front. So this is really important, you know, that spiritual leaders walk the talk, that they are who they say they are in public and in private, to the best of our ability. We're not perfect, but this is definitely not something that's helpful or loving to others. One that I've talked a lot, you know, in the local community that I live in is about purity culture, right? Purity culture, which is sort of denying followers the right to express their natural sexual energy. We are human beings. We are sexual beings. We have those feelings. It's fine to have those feelings, but not every faith believes that. You know, some faiths believe that the desires of the body are evil, or they need to be suppressed because it's, you know, a lacking of spirituality. And this is, you know, maybe women or men expecting to remain a virgin until married, and the same standard not being applied to everyone, right? Or forced celibacy, you know, when that actually, I think, creates issues, you know, with people and their sexual urges, and even people being stoned for having those urges or even acting upon that. And this one is going to be probably controversial as well. There's only one true spiritual belief. You know, as I said, there's like 4,200 spiritual beliefs on earth. Anyone who claims this is the only one is probably, they may not be abusive, but they may be misguiding, you know, the people that they're talking to, you know, and the narrative is usually there's only one valid path and this is it, and I know what it is. And if you don't know what it is, then you're in the out group. You're an unbeliever, you're an infidel. All other spiritual beliefs are wrong or misguided. I think this is really hurtful to people. And people are indoctrinated in a way, some people from childhood, that this is only one true spiritual belief. And while I think it's fine for parents to introduce their children to spirituality, I think it's great. To tell them that this is what you have to be and this is who you have to be, totally disregards their ability to have spiritual sovereignty, right? Totally disregards their ability to make choices for themselves. So one of the things I'm so grateful of my parents is that before I was baptized in the church, they asked me, and I was 9, they asked me, do you want to be? And here's what that means. And they allowed me to choose that, which was very, very unusual, I think, for many people in spiritual and religious traditions. But I think that it's important for us to introduce children to something, but allow people to make their own choices. It's so important to allow people to make their own choices. And this one, you know, the earthly plane is nothing but an illusion. Well, you know, on one hand, I understand what that's saying, right? I understand that of course, if you believe that we have an infinite soul, if you believe that we maybe reincarnate lifetime after lifetime, you might be able to think that maybe the things that happen here don't matter that much, right? It actually was very helpful for me to learn about reincarnation when I had my spiritual awakening, because I realized this thing that I'm getting so angry about or so upset about or so sad about at this moment is probably a blip in time if reincarnation is true. And that was actually helpful to me to understand that. However, for whatever reason, we came here to be in a physical body. We came here to interact in physical ways. We came here to be in societies and to have governments and to have all the things and have politics and have everything that we have. So I don't believe it's an illusion. I believe it's real. And I believe that what we do here matters. It doesn't mean it's the only thing there is for me, but I believe this is my home for right now. And maybe later I'll have a different kind of home. And in not picking on any particular spiritual belief, but I do understand that the Course in Miracles is one that says that this is an illusion. And even Buddhism says, we really need to be detached from all the things. And detachment has been helpful for me in some ways, but being completely detached, if I see racism or sexism or other things that are going on in the world, I'm going to speak up about them. I think it matters. It matters to other people. It matters to me. I'm going to speak up about climate change. These things are important to me. And it doesn't, and I came here to have this experience. So while I'm here, I'm here to participate. And I think telling people that it's an illusion really hurts people, particularly who are suffering. It's like, oh, your suffering is an illusion. Okay, well, to hell with you, right? I mean, I can see someone saying that. It's like, that's not helpful to me. That's very hurtful. And here's another one that goes around, and particularly the metaphysical community. To change everything in your life, you only need to shift your mindset or think positively. I love positive thinking. I love manifestation. I enjoy studying the law of attraction. But to say that it's an either or, right? To say it's an either or, I think is misguided. Our world is co-creative. I can sit and I could write, I want $1 million. But I don't manifest in this world by myself, right? There's economic systems and there's, all kinds of things, and there's 8 billion people manifesting at the same time on this planet. And sometimes what happens in my life is an intersection with someone else's manifestation. So it's not by just going, oh, it's beautiful, my life is wonderful, that it's just going to be that way. Sometimes we have pain, and sometimes we have suffering, and sometimes we go through joyous times, and sometimes we go through really hard times, and sometimes we have loss. And so just thinking positively, while it can be helpful in many ways, I think is a little bit naive. Right? I think it's a little naive. And many human beings are participating in inequitable systems of government, systems of economies. And those are things that are outside of our individual control in most cases, unless we are the leader of those systems. So I think this one can be a little misguiding for a lot of people. And I will just, I just want to talk about this one. This one has a very, very personal aspect to me. And that I actually lost a friend because we were talking about this particular issue. And at the time I was listening to Esther Hicks. I was studying with a metaphysical school, and they were teaching that you attract everything in your life through your vibration, including all the negative things that you've been through. And it's not that I was just deciding that was true. I was exploring whether I felt that was true or not. And there's aspects of that I think can be helpful. However, one of my friends had a very difficult childhood, and we were discussing this, and she got very angry with me because I said that I was studying this in a group, and she told me that she could no longer be my friend because I was hanging out with people who believed that she attracted all of these horrific things to her in her childhood. And, it was a great wake-up call for me, actually. As a spiritual seeker, to realize that not everything that's out there, even in metaphysics, is helpful. Not everything is healthy. Not everything that we're taught, not everything that we come across. Maybe some of us have left what we felt was a more oppressive belief system in order to have something that was more open, and yet we can actually find ourselves in metaphysical fundamentalism, right? Where it's like, this is the way it is. It's just a different way that it is than what you had before. And so this is a huge wake-up call for me that I really needed to use more discernment about the kinds of things that I was engaging with, and to be aware that when I'm having conversations about these kind of spiritual concepts, it might actually trigger someone because I don't know what their background is. So this was a really important awareness for me. And then the final one that I'm going to talk about is denying people's spiritual leadership because of an innate trait, whether that's your gender, your sexual orientation, your age, your ethnicity, or any other trait. If people feel called to this, they should be able to study, to call themselves a spiritual leader, to walk the path, to see what they're made of. No one should be denied the ability to be a spiritual leader because of a specific trait that they have. And so what I want to do now is just move into the 4 steps as I see them to heal from spiritual abuse, right? And the first one is, it's perfectly fine to leave any group, community, or spiritual leader to stop the abuse and protect yourself, right? We need to tell ourselves this, we need to tell our clients this, we need to make this public, and that they are not to blame for what happened. If someone is being abusive, the victim is not to be blamed. And sometimes they will be blamed in gaslighting and those kinds of things. But the first step is get away from what's happening, right? And stop it, set the boundaries, leave the group, move away, whatever a person needs to do. And this is hard for people. This is hard because sometimes they do have to leave behind others. They have to leave behind family. They have to leave behind friends. They lose a sense of community. It's not an easy thing to leave a group. It's not an easy thing. And when I've left particular spiritual groups, I did feel a loss, right? Even if I didn't feel like it was healthy for me, I actually felt a loss of that, because this is our connection. And we're built as human beings to be in community and be connected with each other. But I think it's most important to say it's okay for you to go and you're not to blame for what happened to you. Now, people may be able to internalize that right then, or they may not. It may take them some time, but this feels like step 1 for me. And number 2, it's perfectly fine to hold a person, a group, or organization accountable for the abuse they enacted. And if someone wants to do this and feels called to do this, it's important to have a support system because there's going to be resistance, most likely. Right? It's going to be resistance. So, for the children who were then adults who came back and said, I was sexually abused within the church, there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of trying to cover it up. It wasn't until there was a mass of people and lawyers got involved and, other people were supporting them that they actually began to get traction and they actually began to hold these organizations accountable, right? And it's also okay for a victim to walk away, right? Because some people would criticize, well, why didn't you try to take them to put them in jail, or why didn't you try to do this? Some people may not have the capacity, at least at that time, to do it, right? They may not have a support system. It might be, to use a biblical reference, like a David and Goliath sort of thing. There's this huge organization and you're one person, right? So not judging people for the choice that they make when they're leaving this kind of thing, it's really important. But if they do want to hold it accountable, it's okay to do so. And there's not a timeline or a specific process for your healing. It's fine to be angry, to want revenge, to cry, to feel depressed or even hopeless, and you don't have to get over it faster, right? Depending on the severity of what happened, a person may never fully get over it. They're always going to have those memories. They might get triggered by other things. Every person's healing journey is going to take whatever time it takes, and it's going to take the form that it needs to take, right? So, not forcing someone to move on quicker or to get over it is really, really important. And the fourth one is that I think we need to affirm for ourselves and the people that we work with that you get to choose your relationship to spirituality. This is kind of a radical idea in most arenas because most spiritual belief systems are based on someone having a specific doctrine, a specific dogma, and deciding that they want to tell other people that this is the way, right? This is what most spirituality has been built on throughout human history. So to say to someone, you can choose new beliefs, you can join different groups, you can pick things that feel good and release others that don't, you can mix and match from different traditions, or you can create your own spiritual practices, or you can even decide to reject spirituality altogether, which is something that I did. So after I left the church and I felt that a lot of those teachings had been abusive, I became an atheist for almost 20 years. And if you couldn't prove it to me, it didn't exist. God wasn't a thing because no one could give me evidence. And so, this was my path, and it was okay, for me to take this path, right? It's okay for me to take this path. But it's okay to craft your own spiritual practice and to decide what feels good for you, and you can change it at any time. You don't have to stick with it for the rest of your life. If this week you like this and then next week you get new information and you're like, no, I'm going to completely reject that, you get to do that. And this is a huge, huge point of healing for so many people who have been through spiritual abuse. So I just want to take a moment to come back to the group and just let us just sit for a moment, maybe even just kind of breathe. You can even put your hands on your heart, because that was a lot. It's a lot of energy. It was a lot of exposing things that don't feel very good for us, for others. But ultimately, I believe that spirituality is a really amazing opportunity for every human being on earth. And that the more that we go out there as leaders, the more that we encourage people to take sovereignty over their spiritual path, the more that we encourage people to have freedom, the more as leaders that we release any kind of need of ego or power or domination or control, the more that we shift these old paradigms into something that's much more healthy, much more supportive for the people that we work with and for our world, right? For our world.